Welcome everyone. Good morning. This is part 2 of our 4-part webinar series, Bring Maine Up to Speed. I want to thank you all for joining us and just have a couple ground rules so everyone knows. This meeting is being recorded so everyone's aware. You all come in on mute. If you do have a question or want to ask one of our panelists a question, you have the ability in the chat room to ask a question that way, or also raise your hand and we can recognize you when we get to that point of the program. So with that, I'd like to thank our sponsors for today for this morning's event. And also, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ben Gilman. I'm General Counsel with the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. And we're going to hear a brief welcome video from the President CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Dana Connors.
Hi, my name is Dana Connors, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second in a 4-part series that deals with bringing Maine up to speed. Of course, we're talking about broadband, its role, its importance in our state, our people's lives, as well as our livelihood. On our first session, we provided people an oversight of what was involved in bringing broadband to all parts of our state. We're fortunate to have as a partner Mission Broadband. We have sponsors from Machias Savings Bank to LCI Lincolnville Telephone Company and the University of Southern Maine. We know from the first session that when you speak of broadband as a result of the pandemic, it is so important it cannot be denied. It clearly is one of the unifying issues in the legislature today. The pandemic has brought to our attention its importance, whether it's in healthcare, education, or our economy. We also know that the questions of how we do it, when we do it, and how do we pay for it is fundamental to getting the job done. We're certain to do it well, we need to have the private and the public sectors working together. We also know that that means funding from the federal, the state, and the local governments, and in concert with the private provider. This is an issue that unites all of us. Its importance is front and center on everyone's priority list. And today, we're going to look at how we pay for it, or at least the federal government's role in how we get it done. And we're very pleased to be able to say that we have a representative from Senator Collins' office. We also have a representative from Congressman Jared Golden's office. They'll be here to provide input and information as to how the federal government will participate in this most important issue. I thank you for your attendance, and certainly I look forward to working with all of you in getting the job done. So please, I'll turn this over to Ben Gilman on the Chamber staff to introduce our moderator, our friend Mike Reed. And thank you.
Thank you, Dana, for that introduction. I also would like to start by thanking our sponsors who make this possible. Dana mentioned our partner in this these broadband series, Mission Broadband, our bandwidth sponsor, LCI, our community sponsor, University of Southern Maine, our supporting sponsors, AmeriHealth Caritas, Bangor Savings Bank, Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, Machias Savings Bank, Mimic, and Rudman and Winchell. With that, I'd like to introduce Jim Rogers from Mission Broadband. He's going to have a 2-minute introduction as our partner in this series. Jim?
Thank you, Ben. Good morning. I am Jim Rogers, president of Mission Broadband. I am very pleased to have Mission Broadband join the Maine State Chamber of Commerce in this series of 4 information forums on the critical topic of broadband for our state. Mission Broadband is a company within the ProInfonet family of companies that I began in 1995 as independent technology consultants. For the past 25 years, ProInfonet has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States. Today, we are the managing agent for the New England Telehealth Consortium, providing support to nearly every healthcare provider in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. NETC was established to help members maximize available federal funding and is going into its 15th year. Over those 15 years, we have secured over $100 million in federal funding for the NETC membership. In 2013, I expanded the assistance to healthcare providers with Health Connect Networks. Health Connect Networks assists healthcare providers in 22 states to maximize available federal funding to bring much needed connectivity and dependability to over 2,500 locations across the country. 2 years ago, I started Mission Broadband to focus on the needs of towns that lack adequate broadband. Our goal is to assist municipalities, providers, and other government subdivisions expand critically needed broadband for their areas. We do this through coordination of public-private partnerships, locating funding opportunities, and in some cases, assisting the entity with building a network. Every community is a bit different with their needs or their economic outlook, but one thing is clear: we all need to work together to improve broadband. There is a much needed demand, as we all know, highlighted by the impacts of COVID on your business, our economy, education system, and healthcare providers. Our Bangor-based team has provided superior consulting services to its clients across the United States with many years of experience performing broadband network consulting, feasibility studies, design, build, implementation, and project management. Our multifaceted experience covers municipalities, healthcare, private businesses, ISPs, and broadband networks. You can learn more about us at missionbroadband.com. Thank you again to the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and to all of you for joining this important series. We look forward to today's informative session.
Thank you, Jim. Now we're going to hear from Alan Hinsey with LCI. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me get my slide up. There we go. So thank you, Ben. My name is Alan Hinsey, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Sales for LCI Fiber Optic Network. We're just going to take a minute quickly to tell you a little bit about our company. We are a local and family-owned company. LCI is owned by Shirley Manning and the Manning family. They've been 3 generations now serving and managing and operating this company. LCI Fiber is part of the LTC family of companies, which includes LCI Fiber, Lincolnville Telephone Company, and Tidewater Telecom. And we're headquartered in Noblesboro, Maine. Now, our primary footprint really is in Maine. I want to give people a sense of this from Bangor to Freeport. We also do have some business links that we're serving in Machias and Fort Kent in our northern ring, but our primary footprint is Bangor to Freeport in that mid-coast to coastal area with our Lincolnville Telephone Company area, our Tidewater Telecom primary area, and then the rest of it is our LCI Fiber Optic Network area. We're proud to say that we're part of that fiber optic backbone for coastal Maine, where we're providing over hundreds of miles of our own owned and operated fiber all throughout this coastal Maine area in these towns and many, many more in this area. Finally, this is the picture that really matters, I think. This is what it's all about. And I think part of what this conversation is about with these webinars is how do we get this fiber optic network, this broadband out to more rural parts of the state. This young man right here is a 2-year-old who lives on a very rural road in Union, Maine. And he is actually, this is last November, watching one of our trucks start stringing fiber to his home. That was part of the CARES COVID relief funding for fiber optic broadband that allowed us to put up 100 miles of fiber cable in front of another 325 unserved student households. So this young man is going to grow up with unlimited bandwidth in one of the most remote areas in the state. And that's our goal, is to bring 100% fiber to the home communities wherever we can within that footprint that we're located. And how are we going to do that? That's kind of building on what Dana was talking about earlier. With our own capital, that's our primary way. We're going to be investing our own capital in all of those areas for fiber to the home communities. And we're also going to be using Connect Maine grants. We've successfully used 18 Connect Maine grants so far, and we'll be hoping to do more in these next 2 rounds coming up. Also, federal grants have been a very big part, especially recently with our build out of that 100 miles last year. And also we're developing a number of new innovative partnerships with our municipal partners. So we're doing everything we can to really reach that goal. And we like to say we're doing it one town, one road, and one family, and really one little boy at a time. That's it. LCI Fiber is connecting Maine to the future. If you'd like to learn more about us, just go to lcifiber.net. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. And as we switch over to our program format, I'd like to introduce Mike Reed, who is going to be our moderator. Mike is with Mission Broadband and our partner in this. And Mike is going to introduce and moderate the discussion with Cam O'Brien from Senator Collins' office and Will Woodworth with Representative Golden. Mike, the floor is yours, and thank you for moderating.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure. A lot of us have the opportunity to work with the congressional offices. You know, we had the opportunity to work with Cameron, with James, and with Will. We know that's where the work is done. And we also know they're the ones that are really going to be able to dig in and help us understand what's going on. I'm going to give Ben all the credit for timing. He obviously knew that the COVID relief bill was going to be voted on today, maybe in the House. So he wanted to schedule this event for today. So nice job, Ben. So first up, I want to introduce Cameron O'Brien from Senator Collins' office. He brought an additional layer of expertise with James Irwin. Both will introduce themselves later. And we have Will Woodworth from Congressman Goldman's office. It's a pleasure having you all here. And Cameron, if you would please lead off.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ben, Jim, and Alan, and the entire chamber for having us today. It's really an honor to be here and great opportunity for us to talk about some of the work that we're doing, but also hear about some of the priorities in the state as well on the ground. So again, just really appreciate the opportunity to be participating in this. My name is Cam O'Brien. I'm from Augusta, born and raised, went to the University of Maine at Orono, and that's where I first got involved with Senator Collins' office, interning, and collectively have been with her for about 8 years now, working on a variety of issues, from transportation to fisheries to agriculture, and really excited that my most recent issue is broadband. You may have worked with my predecessor who handled this issue in the office, Mark LeDuc. Mark LeDuc was an absolute institution here in this office, and did wonderful things for the state. He was, a core architect of the PPP program last year. So big shoes to fill, but he really did a lot of the groundwork in this space, and excited to take that mantle from him. So before I jump into sort of the bill that we've been working on most recently in this space, I did want to kick it over to James to let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Cam. My name is James Irwin, and I have been with Senator Collins' office since between my internships and full-time staffer for about 4 years. And I, similar to Cam, I grew up in Yarmouth, graduated from Bates College in 2018, and began interning in Senator Collins' state office, and worked my way down here to DC. I worked under Mark LeDuc on the issues that Cam just mentioned, and the PPP, and also on broadband, and I'm continuing to work on that portfolio now. I'm very excited to be able to do it with Cam and reintroduce Senator Collins' bill, which he will go into in more detail right now.
That's right. So James worked with Mark last Congress on the American Broadband Build-Out Act. And that was a bill that Senator Collins introduced with Senator Jones from Alabama. You may know Senator Jones was not reelected. So at the outset of this Congress, we had to find a new partner in this. And we've teamed up with Senator Rosen from Nevada. As you probably well know, geographically across the United States, where broadband is a challenge, but there is a lot of commonalities, between states like Nevada and Maine. Even at first glance, they may not seem very similar. So we were happy to demonstrate the shared geographic needs of this, making sure that, it's not perceived as, just a Northeast issue or even an East Coast issue, but really a national issue. So really happy about having her as a partner. And an advantage of having her as a partner is that she sits on the Senate Commerce Committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction. And so that only helps our cause in helping this bill move forward. So to get into the bill a little bit, American Broadband Build Out Act, and the acronym is ABBA for any of you Dancing Queen fans. It would, so the original bill that we introduced last year was for $5 billion in federal grants. Given sort of what the pandemic has, highlighted and exacerbated about these needs, and the growing national conversation around this issue, we've bumped that up. We've tripled the funding in there to $15 billion. Something that we think is certainly justifiable, reasonable, and something that this pandemic again has really revealed. And in introducing the bill last week on the floor, Senator Collins, referenced an anecdote that she'd heard from the town manager of Fort Fairfield up in Aroostook County that really just kind of encompassed all of the issues that we're trying to tackle here. She spoke about how, students who have been, who have had to do remote learning from home are having to drive to the library at night just to get a connection to send their assignments in. Talked about how there was a business in the town that, really wanted to be there, but could not compete without, a reliable internet connection, and was forced to relocate. She talked about how seniors, who need to have specialized care, but, may not have the capacity to travel long distances to meet with their healthcare providers, are really limited in their telehealth options, which could, address these problems. So it is, as I know I'm preaching to the choir here, it's a multifaceted problem across all sectors of the economy, but at its core, it really is an economic issue. And so what this bill would do, it would set up private public partnerships that would require, buy-in from the internet service providers, the communities involved, and obviously the federal government. The federal government would put up 50% of the match here, to be matched by 25% by the internet service provider, and then another 25% from the state, and the municipality can kick in funds there. And so it's been interesting to hear about at the state level, this conversation about a potential broadband bond. And what's exciting about that is that this could easily be paired up with this legislation and leveraged, use those funds to leverage the federal funds as a match from this bill. And so what this, obviously there's many priorities in this space, many approaches, but what this bill is really focused on is building out the infrastructure itself. We've, a lot of the COVID programs that we've seen, and we'll get a little more into that, but a lot of what has been done in that space is short-term fixes, subsidies for service that is required during this pandemic, remote learning, remote work. But what we're looking at is longer-term stability, infrastructure that's going to be there for the long term, that will be future-proof, can be updated as the technology advances, as we know it will. And so this is also going to be, there'd be prioritization. We wanted to make sure that there was prioritization for especially unserved areas, and that would be areas where fewer than 68% of households have at least 10 1 speeds, and fewer than 40% have 25 3 speeds. So we're really focusing on building out where there is an existing infrastructure, really trying to avoid overbuilding. And I know these terms are overused to some point, but we do have specific parameters in there for how we target these. And another 15% of the awards are really targeted for the areas where they're most geographically isolated and they're highest cost. For example, we had a constituent from Easton reach out, which is actually right next door to Fort Fairfield. And they were told by their internet service provider that, yeah, they could get a connection to their door, but it would cost $15,000 out of their pocket. So that is obviously just untenable. And so this bill would specifically target those areas where the build out is prohibitively expensive unless you have this federal support. And sorry, I'm looking at the other screen, just going through my notes here. It would also provide grants to states and state designated entities for digital literacy and public awareness campaigns, because what studies have found is that in rural areas in particular, even where there is broadband available, the adoption rate is lower than in urban areas. And that just may be an issue of awareness, an education issue. So the bill does provide some funds to help increase adoption rates where and when it does become available. And so that's a pretty general summary of what the bill is. We'd be happy to answer some specific questions about its contents. Just generally, it's a bill that we, as with most pieces of legislation in Congress, it's hard to get a bill to move on its own. And so what we often try to do is find a bigger legislative vehicle that it's going to be incorporated into, tacked onto, and move it that way. And so in this space, what we're looking at as a potential vehicle is this infrastructure package that the Biden administration has been talking about for some time. And we are happy to see and encouraged to see that the administration's view of infrastructure does involve broadband, and it's not just singularly focused on roads and bridges, but it does account for the need to build out broadband as well. So we're going to be focused in the months ahead, working with Senator Rosen on Commerce Committee to see how we can incorporate that into a bigger infrastructure package that I think, for a long time the idea of an infrastructure package has had strong bipartisan support, but it's never materialized. So we are excited. We are cautiously optimistic about the prospect of that, and we'll be trying to certainly advance this bill through that avenue. I just wanted to mention one other bill that Senator Collins recently got back onto. It's a bill with Senator Manchin, and it's a hotspots bill. Again, this is one of those shorter term fixes designed to meet the need that we've been seeing through the pandemic, and that would provide grants to libraries to purchase hotspots and other internet connectivity devices to provide to the community. And I will say that some of that funding was included in the most recent COVID bill, so we're happy to see that that's being addressed there. But again, it's we subscribe to the all of the above approach at this stage, but are certainly focusing some of our legislative efforts more on the infrastructure build out piece. And so I know I've said a lot, kind of rambled a little bit, but happy to kick it over to Will or take questions at this point, Mike.
Fine. James, did you want to add anything, any comments to add to Cam's description?
Only to reemphasize the fact that this legislation is meant to empower the private ISPs. In the introductory video, Dana Connors said it is. We are all on board with the public-private partnership approach. We all believe that companies like LCI and Mission Broadband are best positioned to build out from their existing infrastructure to connect the last mile. We just know that, as Cam said, it's sometimes prohibitively expensive. So we want to be able to empower you all to make those connections and make sure that the necessity is no longer a privilege. The necessity of broadband is realized in all of our communities. And I also just want to note some public thanks to Mike and Jim, who both contributed to some of their expertise and some suggestions on the latest draft of the bill. I don't want to embarrass him too much, but I do see that Ben Sanborn is in the audience. He also was, we leaned on him pretty heavily, and I know Mark and he collaborated on sort of the core of this legislation as well, so deserves some credit too.
Well, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. There have to be questions, so while you're thinking about them and how this all, there's things we don't see up here in Maine, all the magic that goes on, tying bills to other bills, and I'm really interested in how the COVID relief bill that, I don't know, maybe they're voting on right now, will that have any interplay? So hopefully we'll have some time to get back to that. But Will Woodworth from Congressman Golden's office, would you please take over?
Absolutely. So I will sort of give a little bit of a more general background. And so just as a reminder, I'm here on behalf of Congressman Jared Golden of the 2nd District. I advise him on broadband issues, his small business committee work, and a range of other domestic policy topics. I've been working for him since 2019 and more generally in Congress since 2013. And again, echo Kim and James's thanks to the Chamber for hosting and Mission Broadband for facilitating. Certainly appreciates, the Congressman appreciates opportunities to work with the Chamber in particular. In fact, his first exposure to broadband at the federal level was just about exactly 2 years ago at the Small Business Committee when Mr. Connors of the Chamber was testifying before the committee on the importance of broadband to his members. So very glad to continue that here. I'm going to start my remarks with an overview of the Congressman's perspective on the topic, then move to a brief description of where we were before the pandemic, then fill in some details on what we've seen in the most recent 8 bills and some general thoughts on how businesses might approach their broadband challenges. So first, from Congressman Golden's point of view, I think the first and most persistent issue that he has heard is the lack of effective broadband mapping that we have at the federal level. Early in his first term, he chaired a subcommittee hearing at the Small Business Committee on that topic, invited Unitel, the main ISP, to testify, and heard from them and many other people at the hearing otherwise that our federal maps are, as I think many people on this call probably know, have imprecise geographic granularity. And so the effect is they overstate coverage in many cases. And by doing so, hold back help that the federal government might otherwise be providing to connect folks. So subsequently, he supported the Broadband Data Act, which was legislation that Congress enacted in the prior Congress, which authorized the FCC to improve its mapping process in a more granular way, and then voted again with the rest of Congress in December as part of the end-of-year omnibus to provide the FCC funding to fully carry out that improved mapping process. And so the FCC has started to move on that, and while that effort is underway, there's not yet a fixed date for when that's going to be available. So we're going to be monitoring that, and as a result, the state in Maine and elsewhere in localities have really been forced to step up and try to fill that data gap. And I know the state and the Maine Broadband Coalition have done their best on that, but there really needs to be some more federal leadership there. And his next, I think, key tenet is that from what he's seen, local initiative is really key to finding broadband solutions. I think that's a familiar concept for people in Maine. In New England generally, the town meeting is often where the rubber meets the road on any kind of issue. Communities, I think, are increasingly recognizing that broadband should be treated on par with necessary infrastructure like roads, water systems, phone systems, electricity, and so on. And with that recognition comes an understanding that the network is a public good and that it's key to economic development. And without it, the community needs to make sure that they can bring it forth through cooperation and investment in the network. And I think, Maine has many examples. The Congressman's personally toured the Down East Broadband Utility in Calais and Baileyville, held a field hearing of the Small Business Committee with a representative from the DBU and also a representative from Oak Bluffs, which is also working on their own efforts. Old Town, Orono, Argyle, Alton, Rook Bluffs again, Franklin County, a number of island communities, a number of folks in the first district as well as the second district. So we really have a lot of local leadership in Maine on this issue. And I think given the pace of federal support on this, I think it's been pretty important that localities have taken steps to move things along at their own level rather than waiting entirely on the federal government to come in and help. And finally, he would stress that details matter with federal broadband programs. So that's hardly unique to broadband programs at the federal level, but maybe even more clear given the technical nature of the issue. There's certainly no shortage of nice sounding efforts at the federal level and proposals and so on, but it's not uncommon for the federal delegation here in Maine, and I'm sure in many other states, to hear some criticisms about how they actually work on the ground. So, starting with mapping, it's great. We have a map. You can go online, see supposedly where broadband is available, where it's not, but there are a lot of questions about, when you get into it, what is the granularity? Where's the data coming from? Who's verifying that data? Are there any details on the quality of that service? Or is it just saying whether you have it or you not? Who counts as served and who gets to make that decision? On infrastructure grants, what areas qualify? What data is used to make those decisions? What types of grantees can take advantage of the funding? What documentation is required for those grantees? And how quickly are those funding decisions made? And how does that funding interact with other existing programs at the state and federal level? So the Congressman is definitely intent on making sure that he understands and hears from constituents about their understanding of the existing federal programs, and we'll be continuing to make that a priority as we move towards the new programs that I'll describe in a minute. So sort of stepping back before the pandemic, just for a basic overview of what we're building on. So the FCC is the largest federal funder of broadband programs. I know Jim Rogers understands this very well from his business, but there's the Universal Service Program funded. As anyone who's looked at their cell phone bill, you might see a USF fee line item. That's where that funding comes from. So the FCC has its own pool of funding for telehealth, for the E-rate program, which connects schools and libraries, for the Lifeline Program, which subsidizes connections for low-income people, and for what's now known as the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund Program, formerly the CAF program, which builds out rural broadband. Some of these programs are relatively invisible to consumers and end users, but they do really make much of the existing rural broadband infrastructure possible. The SEC also handles mapping as a lead agency, although the NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce, also has a secondary mapping role and has worked with the state of Maine on that. NTIA has also pretty robust technical assistance arm, and as you'll see, they will be getting back into the business of broadband infrastructure. Other agencies that are involved include USDA. They're sort of perhaps the most visible federal agency in this front because they issue competitive grants that folks are affirmatively applying for, often localities. And so they have loans, Community Connect grants, and also the Reconnect program, which is a pilot program that's rapidly become one of their largest sources of funding. And then finally, there are a number of other agencies, such as Economic Development Administration, part of the Department of Commerce, and the Northern Border Regional Commission, that have more general purpose infrastructure or economic development grants that can be purposed for broadband uses. And so starting to look at 2020 and forward, there was the first sort of bite of this apple in the CARES Act. There was some telehealth funding included there, but most of the funding has come through the December omnibus, the end of the year omnibus. And so a lot of that has yet to bear fruit. And so there's a lot of clues here to what we'll be seeing over the next year or two. So one particular item of importance to the Congressman is Congress appropriated funding to fully fund the process through the Broadband Data Act, update our maps at the FCC. The FCC has taken procedural steps to start that process, but we're excited that those maps should be more effective and also allow end users to submit corrections to the FCC when they know that the data is wrong. Other provisions include $300 million for the NTIA to hold a broadband infrastructure grant program, and that will be targeted at partnerships between states, local governments, and ISPs. So somewhat similar to the bill that Cam was discussing. It's not yet operational, but we're expecting details from NTIA on that soon. NTIA was also given $1 billion for tribal broadband expansion along roughly the same lines for the infrastructure side, but also to include things like telehealth, distance learning, affordability, and digital inclusion. Another funding stream in the end of the year bill, $250 million for the FCC to plus up the existing telehealth grant program that was created in the CARES Act earlier in 2020. $2 billion for an item that's more relevant to ISPs themselves about making sure our networks are using secure equipment. $3.2 billion for a temporary emergency broadband benefit through the FCC. Again, another program that is yet to start, but which will build on the Lifeline program that already exists to subsidize internet access during the public health crisis for low-income families and folks that have recently been laid off or furloughed, up to $50 a month for most consumers and up to $75 a month on tribal lands. And finally, that bill included $285 million to NTIA to support internet access for certain minority institutions of higher education and minority-owned businesses. And then moving to the bill that we're about to pass and likely going to enact in the next couple of days, the American Rescue Plan Act. That includes the top line, or the most prominent broadband provision is over $7 billion for a supplemental funding stream for the E-rate program that I mentioned earlier at the FCC. And so it'll be expanding that program with an appropriated funding stream that's on top of the USF funding stream, the Universal Service Fund funding stream, and that'll be dedicated to remote learning connectivity. So that's for schools and libraries, students, library patrons, to access connected devices like hotspots, like tablets, and for the broadband subscriptions to connect those to the internet to make sure that during these times of capacity restrictions, we're able to make sure that everybody still has access to online learning resources. And then there's also a large $350 billion flexible aid pool for states and localities in the upcoming bill. And as LCI mentioned, as Mr. Hinsey mentioned, the state may decide to use some of that again for broadband infrastructure purposes. And so that's another potential funding stream coming down the pike. And so moving beyond, as Ken mentioned, we may be looking at another infrastructure effort. The president has stated that his next priority following this recovery bill that we're currently working on is to move towards post-pandemic economic recovery. So that's probably going to mean some version of infrastructure legislation. The House passed a bill in the last Congress known as HR 2 that was focused on surface transportation, roads, bridges, rail, and other things, but did include a few broadband provisions. The House is starting that process back up. So it's likely that given a funding deadline, September 30th funding deadline for some of those surface transportation programs, there will either be some kind of effort standalone on those programs or a larger bill as the president's talking about on that wraps in infrastructure in a much broader sense. Either way, it's possible that those bills could end up including some broadband provisions. Some options for what might be in there: either additional funding for existing and pending programs that have not yet been rolled out, grants for digital literacy in recognition that broadband is most useful when businesses and consumers know how best to make use of it. And then also potentially evaluation of Dig Once policies, which is when federally funded road construction involves simultaneous installation of broadband conduit, and maybe some examination of collecting broadband pricing data to layer on top of the mapping data that we're already going to be putting in place. And so finally, just sort of a more practical thoughts on some of the questions that we get here in the Congressman's office. Businesses, communities sometimes approach us wondering, we have a broadband problem, what should we do? So I think we have a great situation in Maine in that the state, although historically under-resourced, has a great resource in the Connect Maine Authority. And I think, as everybody in this call knows, if you're a chamber member, you understand that ISPs are coming at this from a return on investment perspective. So the question really is, if you're in a broadband desert, so to speak, how do you tilt that ROI to the mutual benefit of the end users and ISPs who might come to serve them? So first, you can go to broadbandmap.fcc.gov. That's the current source for federal broadband mapping. Again, currently imprecise, but in the process of being updated. The Maine Broadband Coalition on their website has a crowdsourced map, just try to fill those gaps. And then if your locality has worked with Connect Maine previously to undertake broadband planning, they may have a map of the local infrastructure that's already in place. And so consulting your municipality is a great idea. Next step might be seeking quotes from the ISPs that you determine to be in your local area about what it would take for them to extend service. And again, as others have mentioned, sometimes that cost is a huge sticker shock, but if you're a large industrial customer, maybe that's something that you can deal with. If you're not, the next step is some combination of aggregating demand among your neighboring businesses or residences to approach the ISP with an offer to sign a multi-year contract as a group. And that's something that might tilt the equation for them. If they know that a whole neighborhood will sign up for 2 years, it might then be worth their while to bring fiber or cable to your community. Next, and I think the Connect Maine Authority's website has a good primer on this, but organizing a broadband committee in your community is a great step. That's really I think, entry point to competing for Connect Maine planning grants, which is then a great entry point for the whole range of state and federal grant funding that might be available to you for broadband investment. So again, please consider the Congressman's office a resource to anybody who's looking to navigate that process. We're happy to point you in the right direction. So thanks again to the Chamber for the opportunity here, and I'll turn it back over to Mike Reed.
Thank you, Will. I'm not seeing any questions yet, so please send your questions in. I would offer Cam, James, do you have any comments that you want to add while we wait for some questions? Anything that popped into your head while we were talking?
Well, yeah, from what Will was just saying, I would just add to that. There are quite a few different federal programs attempting to address this issue. And in part that reflects the fact that there are very diverse geographic and economic needs across the whole country. I think we'll describe this pretty well. One of our challenges has been getting appropriate coordination between all the different national programs, between FCC and TIA. USDA has the Reconnect program as well. Getting them to work together. In our bill, we specifically have a provision to prevent duplication between these programs, but Senator Collins has secured language in appropriation bills in the past requiring coordination between the agencies. But I would just note that that is one of the challenges that we face is trying to coordinate and leverage different pots of federal money. And certainly organizing a local broadband committee is a great first step in getting everything together to try and navigate that effectively.
Thank you. Cam, anything you want to add?
I think Will did a great job of talking about what's been recently passed and what's coming down the pike, and it's going to, as we've seen with a lot of these programs that have come either out of the CARES package or this most recent December package, a lot of these programs are new, and or we're asking these agencies to do something that they haven't done previously. And on top of that, we're going through the transition of administrations, and there's a lot of vacancies still at these agencies and departments. So all that is to say, I think that the impact of what's been in these bills for broadband may not be felt for some time as these funds start to actually make their way down to the states and the entities. But just know that there was a lot of support in there, and we're standing by to help everybody on this call and any constituents or constituent groups get access to that funding when it does become available.
Thank you. And I just have to dig in just a little bit and on your crystal ball. I know we have not seen the bill. One thing, those of us in Maine are really, it's been very helpful, is to actually see affordability addressed. It's been a difficult issue. All of us that work in this field we don't know what the definition of affordability is. And it was very gratifying to see that first round of money coming up. Is there anything that you've seen in the current bill that might extend that funding? Just a quick back of the envelope, doesn't look like that funding will last too long. Any insight on that?
Now, are you talking specifically about sort of the reimbursement programming?
Yeah, I'm actually talking, I call it the expanded Lifeline Program, the thing that Will mentioned and James mentioned, or you mentioned it as well. But, it gives people an opportunity to get on the network and stay on the network. I just wonder if that's something that you envision might continue to help Maine residents.
Absolutely. And Will, correct me if I'm wrong, I do think there is a continuation of that funding in this current bill.
I would have to double check, but I know that we haven't actually started dispersing the 3.6 billion from the December bill. So I think we haven't run out yet. But I'm sure that Congress, if the pandemic is continuing and that funding stream is running down, I'm sure there'll be a conversation about plussing that up to make sure that folks are still able to take advantage of that opportunity.
But
whoops, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say, yeah, I mean, you're right that underlying this entire conversation is affordability, not only for the service providers to build it out at the onset, but then to trickle down to the customers. So I think we have to have a multifaceted approach here. In the interim, have these sort of support programs that get people connected and keep them online. But at the same time, focus on building out the infrastructure, which will in turn have the effect of bringing the cost down and making it more affordable universally once we have that infrastructure in place.
Thank you. We do have some questions coming in. I don't want to miss them. Any insight into the discussion of 100 over 100 at the FCC and what the timing and impact it might have on grants? The magic number of what the speed ought to be that we're shooting for, and everyone grumbles a little bit. We all grumbled over 4/1, then 10/1, and 25/3. This question is in regards to 100/100. Any comments?
So I don't have any special insight into where that stands right now. I mean, I know it's obviously a topic of debate, and I mean, I think the FCC, I guess, as far as timing, the best I could say is the FCC is still currently in a partisan deadlock. So I wouldn't expect necessarily that to shift until we get another commissioner on the commission. But that certainly could be something that's up early in the new majority's docket. So I think it's definitely worth watching. I mean, I would have to double check. I mean, I think the FCC takes their process is so lengthy to roll out any funding stream that I'm sure they're in the middle of a few items that probably are too far gone to change anyway. So I think I would have to check where things stand in terms of what the next funding cycle would be that would actually be impacted by this shift. But there's also, I think, related legislative action in terms of these, what we're going to do in an infrastructure bill, if those definitions are going to be still 25/3 or 25/25 or 100/100. I think that's all definitely up for debate.
Thank you. Ben, are we doing okay on time? Are we okay? Couple more questions?
We are. We got about 5 minutes. We have another question in the chat, and
Yes, we do.
one question after that one, Mike.
Okay. Is there any consideration of having the FCC regulate broadband as a utility that is an impediment to moving forward with private partners for a municipality? Having driven all competitors away, the remaining one can do pretty much what it wants regarding cost and service quality upgrades for internet access. I'm not sure what the question is. Well, I guess the question is there any consideration of having the FCC regulate broadband as a utility?
I don't believe there's any really serious discussion of that at the moment. It is certainly an idea that's out there. I think Senator Collins would share some of those concerns about the long-term viability. It's broadband isn't quite like electricity or water service. You don't necessarily need to have a monopoly serving a particular area. So it's not the same as the power company. So to the extent that that market competition can be preserved, that tends to be the current thinking. Although there is obviously some talk of where there may be regions and areas where it's more appropriate to operate as a public utility instead.
One other question we have, this is probably the last one. Well, ABBA, I really like the ABBA thing. Cam, I didn't even think of that. So will ABBA dole out or hand money to the state to use as they see fit, or will they write RFPs? And just a little commercial there. We had some really last minute efforts that some of the providers did an extraordinary job of trying to build out infrastructure at the very last minute to get under the end of the year CARES Act. So, but the question is, are we going to get money to the states, to the municipalities? Will the agencies, NTIA, be handling it?
Sure. So this is it's going to be run through the FCC in partnership with NTIA in consultation with them. So, and that's an effort to get them to talk to each other a little more closely and not duplicate efforts and coordinate. And then the funds would then flow from the FCC, and James, you can jump in here, to the states, and then down to the municipalities that are going to be running the projects in their jurisdictions.
Yeah, so the core idea of the program is it is essentially a state grant program. So states would be setting up their own programs for administering how the funds are spent, but there are very specific guardrails in place to ensure that the funding is targeted towards last mile infrastructure, unserved areas. There's, as we mentioned, the high cost, geographically challenged set aside as well. and making sure we're using consistent mapping and consistent FCC definitions. As Cam mentioned, we are requiring consultation with NTIA to administer the program, to administer the grants to the states, that is, and we're doing what we can to make sure that coordination is real. We know that sometimes when the word coordinate or consult is in federal legislation, somebody sends an email between agencies and then just plows ahead anyway because they consider that they've consulted with their partner. And we have language that is a little stronger than that, and making sure that they're actually coordinating and using their different expertise in order to make sure that they're not duplicating each other, they're not making mistakes, and that they're using the best data that's available.
Here's a real softball. Do any of the panelists have any thoughts on the impacts of Starlink? As you folks know, they were one of the, they are the largest RDOF recipient in Maine, 30 some odd $million. Does anybody have any comments on the future of the LEOs?
Sure. I'll just say, I know that Starlink, their government affairs team has been making the rounds and introducing their company to folks on the Hill. So we recently had a meeting with Starlink and talked about their efforts in Maine. Personally, I was, pretty impressed with the work that they've been doing. And it really aligns with sort of our priorities in the space, focusing on the most remote and rural areas first, and then building backwards from there. Really, just following it closely, excited. I've got some friends and family who are interested in the service because it's better than what's being offered in their area. And so just think it's a interesting and exciting complementary approach to what we're all trying to achieve here. And it does align by prioritizing these remote areas first. And so would be interested to learn from you all and the rest of our constituents as that starts coming online, how that is working for everybody and what it's actually looking like on the ground.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say it's pretty early here, so I think we're waiting to see how their pricing and reliability and service shakes out, and whether it's truly a viable complete alternative, or as we saw in the recent Bangor Daily News story, are folks just using it as they need to have a wired backup. If that's the case, then I think the question makes a good point where you don't want to be siphoning off the highest value customers from the wired network that still needs to exist there. But we'll have to see.
Another tool in the toolbox. I think there's one other question, Ben, and I'm afraid I don't understand it enough to repeat, but I know there was discussion about overbuilding and prevention of overbuilding. All of the federal programs I'm aware of have language to prevent overbuilding. There's a question about how this might be handled at a municipal level. But are there any other thoughts on overbuilding? I think I'll just open the floor to that.
I think it just comes down to, obviously you don't want to overbuild something that's already available if people just don't know about it. But there are viable questions around, cost and reliability and what the service actually means. For instance, almost any location in Maine has access to, geosynchronous satellite service, but that's not necessarily something that we want to force on people if they have other options. So, we wouldn't be standing in the way of someone to come and bring in a fixed terrestrial product there. So I think it's all pretty contextual.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ben. Sorry.
I was going to say, Mike, we're a couple minutes past the hour. Yep. And it looks like we're heading into that point of wrapping things up. So I'll let you, and then I'll take it over from there.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists. We get to hear how it really works down there, and just you can take this back to the bosses that all of us on this call are here to support whatever you need for help to get this done. So all you have to do is ask. One small commercial. These folks just set the stage for the public-private partnership, federal money, matching state money, maybe some local money. Our next panelists, the next forum that we're going to have, we're going to dig down into the state level and what we're doing. So we've had some federal funding. We've had the delegation offices speak to us about what's coming at us. And now we're going to drill down into the state level and how this all ties together. And hopefully we can all coordinate it. So thanks for the opportunity, Ben.
Thank you, Mike. And I just want to thank Cam and Will and James and Mike for that robust discussion. While we were doing it, it made me think in years past, we would have taken a delegation of folks down to Washington and had these meetings and made the round to the offices. And today we sit here with, 45 people interacting with the staff of our congressional delegation. What a wonderful opportunity that is. So thank you guys. Really informative. We appreciate it for what is one of the top priorities for the state of Maine. I want to close out by thanking our partnership with Mission Broadband, thanking LCI, the University of Southern Maine as a community sponsor, AmeriHealth Caritas, Bangor Savings Bank, Central Maine Power, Eaton Peabody, IDEX Labs, Delta Dental, Mimic, and Rudman and Winchell, all our sponsors for this web series. We really appreciate it. That's what makes it possible. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your morning. And the next one is going to be March 23rd. Look for the information that's going to be coming out shortly on the next panel discussion on broadband here in Maine. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.